When I look back at the beginning, it's almost strange how warm and solid everything seemed. I was 34, glowing with the kind of hope that only comes from believing you've finally found your person. He was 43, already a father 3 times over, steady and established in a way that made me feel safe. We'd been together for 2 years before we married, and those first months after the wedding felt like we were building something permanent, like laying stones for a foundation that would last. I imagined a future full of children, laughter, shared responsibilities, and the kind of teamwork that makes hard days bearable. It wasn't just me stepping into marriage with him. It was me stepping into a household already full of life. His 3 kids, 18, 19, and 21, lived with us, each carrying their own personalities and their own needs. I tried to be a respectful presence, not a replacement for their mother, but a steady adult who cooked, drove, cleaned, and supported. There was a lot of juggling, a lot of self-teaching. I was new to being a step-parent, new to managing a house of that size, and yet I kept telling myself it was worth it because we were a family now. From the start, though there were subtle imbalances. He worked long hours, and I did too. My tech job was demanding, but when we got home, it was assumed I would handle most of the housework. At first it felt like no big deal. I wanted to show him and the kids that I was committed. I wanted to be helpful. I told myself that once we settled into a routine, we'd naturally start dividing chores, that he'd start noticing how much I was doing and pitch in. Then came the struggles with infertility. We'd started trying for a baby almost immediately after the wedding. Month after month, negative test after negative test, we went from optimism to quiet disappointment. By the end of the first year, I could feel the weight of it pressing down on me. The hope, once so bright, began to flicker. Every doctor visit, every ovulation test, every carefully timed night felt like an exam we were failing. And still, I carried the house. I did the grocery runs, the cooking, the laundry, the scheduling, the finances. He was affectionate at times, but mostly distant, quick to retreat into silence if I brought up my stress or my exhaustion. Last year, everything cracked open. I was laid off from my tech job, a blow that felt like someone pulling the rug out from under me. 2 weeks later, he had a stroke. It was mild, thank God, but still enough to leave him partially incapacitated for months. In that moment, without thinking, I stepped up. I took on everything: his care, the house, the finances, the kids' schedules, and my own grief about losing my job. I remember telling myself, this is marriage. This is what you do for the person you love. We burned through our savings fast. Medical bills, living costs, the debt from keeping up appearances, all piled on. I made calls to creditors. I rearranged payment plans. I sold things. I hustled, and even though I was overwhelmed, there was a strange kind of pride in it. I was holding everything together, being the glue. I kept waiting for a thank you, for recognition, for a hug that said, I see you. It didn't come. He was too sick, too tired, and the kids were too caught up in their own lives. By the time this June rolled around, things looked better on paper. I'd landed a new full-time job. He'd made about a 90% recovery. From the outside, we looked like we were coming back from the brink. But inside our home, nothing had changed. I was still doing everything: cleaning, managing the finances, letting the kids borrow my car for school and work, cooking, and trying to keep up with our fertility appointments. Every time I asked him for help, it turned into a fight. He'd dismiss me, shut me out, or give me the silent treatment. And yet, on those nights, he'd still expect sex as if the day's tension had never happened, as if my exhaustion and tears didn't exist. There's a particular loneliness that comes from living with someone who's physically present but emotionally gone. It's like standing next to a closed door you keep knocking on, hoping they'll open it. I kept telling myself to be patient, to hold on, that marriage is hard work. But the truth was, I felt myself fading, becoming a caretaker and a provider instead of a wife, becoming invisible in my own home. When I finally got pregnant in late May, it felt like a miracle. I let myself dream. I pictured holding our baby, healing our marriage, bringing us closer together. For 6 weeks, I carried that fragile hope inside me. And then, just like that, it was gone. I miscarried. The loss hit me like a train. I didn't get out of bed for a week. I was in pain, bleeding, numb. I didn't eat. I didn't shower. I didn't care about the dishes or the laundry or the bills. It was as if my body and my heart had given up together. And during that time, he did nothing. The house fell apart. The kids fended for themselves. He carried on as if life was normal. One night, when the pain was bad and I told him I hadn't eaten all day, he just scrolled on his phone. He didn't offer to make me food, and when I finally dragged myself out of bed to make something, he asked me to make him something too. That moment burned itself into me. It was like a switch flipped. I was bleeding, grieving, barely holding myself upright, and the man I'd carried through his stroke couldn't even make me a sandwich. For the next few months, I drifted in and out of depression. When I finally started to surface, to breathe again, I began to see things more clearly. Not just the miscarriage, but the pattern, the emotional neglect, the financial deception, the way he'd withheld that he was $15,000 behind on taxes, the lie about having money for our vacation that forced me to max out my credit cards to cover it. We were filing for bankruptcy now. My credit was wrecked. My heart was wrecked. And still, he didn't seem to see the problem. I decided I couldn't keep swallowing my pain. I sat him down for a serious conversation, laid everything out, how I felt, what I needed, what was broken. I gave him an ultimatum: marriage counseling or I was done. He dismissed me, told me I was overreacting, said the financial stuff wasn't a big deal, refused counseling. It was the first time I seriously considered packing up and leaving. After that night when I'd sat him down and poured my heart out, the air in the house turned into something sharp and heavy. The silence wasn't just absence of sound. It was a weapon. For nearly 2 weeks, he barely spoke to me except for clipped, practical sentences, and even those carried an edge. I'd pass him in the hallway and feel him looking past me, as if I was a stranger in my own home. The kids sensed it too. Meals became quiet. Even the television felt too loud. I'd expected that conversation to be a turning point, maybe even a breakthrough. I thought that by showing him my pain, by naming it, we'd finally be able to face it together. But his reaction cracked something inside me. Instead of leaning toward me, he recoiled, retreating into defensiveness and minimization. It was like I'd been shouting across a canyon for years, and only now realized no echo was coming back. I remember one morning standing at the sink, my hands in cold dishwater, and feeling an odd detachment, like I was watching myself from the outside. "What are you doing?" A voice in my head asked. "Why are you still here?" That question became a quiet pulse under everything I did. As I folded laundry, as I paid bills, as I let his kids borrow my car for work, as I forced myself out of bed each morning for my job, the question whispered, "When will you choose yourself?" The miscarriage had been the epicenter, but the tremors stretched far. In therapy, because I'd started individual sessions at my own expense, Sai began to see the patterns. His dismissive, avoidant attachment style, my tendency to overfunction, to fix, to rescue, the way I equated love with sacrifice. It was uncomfortable to admit how much of my identity I'd tied to being indispensable, how much I'd taught him through my actions that he didn't have to show up because I always would. One evening, about a week into the silent treatment, I caught my reflection in the bathroom mirror. My eyes looked older, my shoulders were slumped. I thought about the woman I used to be, the one who stayed up late dreaming about baby names, who loved coding and problem solving, who laughed easily, and I wondered where she'd gone. It wasn't just that I'd lost a pregnancy. I'd lost myself. I began writing in a journal late at night after everyone was asleep. Page after page poured out. Memories, small betrayals, the sound of his voice when he dismissed me, the smell of the hospital during his stroke, the feeling of our empty savings account. Writing became a lifeline. It helped me see patterns I'd been too exhausted to name. Like how every time I tried to have a vulnerable conversation, he shut down. How apologies only came after days of tension, and even then they were transactional, leading straight to his expectation of intimacy. 2 weeks after my ultimatum, he finally caved. He apologized. Said he'd been wrong, said he'd agree to counseling even though he wouldn't like it. For a moment, I felt relief bloom in my chest. Maybe this was the beginning of change. I leaned toward him, kissed him, told him I felt better. And then, without missing a beat, he asked for sex. It was like watching a balloon deflate. Whatever softness his apology had sparked in me evaporated instantly. I felt my stomach drop, that heavy, nauseous recognition. He doesn't get it. He's not sorry for the pain. He's just trying to get back to normal. Normal for him meant my body available, my hands busy, my voice quiet. I said no. I rolled over and stared at the wall until sleep came. And in the morning, the old guilt crept in. Because despite everything, despite the lies and the neglect, he wasn't a cartoon villain. He went to work every day. He didn't cheat. He could be funny with the kids. He'd survived a stroke. He was, by many people's standards, a good man, but a good man can still leave you starving emotionally. A good man can still erode you by inches. My friends didn't know the full story. On social media, we looked like a resilient couple, clawing our way back from hardship. At family gatherings, I played the supportive wife. The shame of our bankruptcy, of the debt, of the miscarriage, all stayed behind our front door. Some nights I'd curl up on the couch and think about packing a bag, just leaving. But then the guilt would rise like a tide. The kids needed stability. He'd been through so much. Wasn't marriage supposed to be hard? One Saturday morning, I took my coffee out to the backyard. The sun was already hot, and the grass felt rough under my bare feet. I closed my eyes and tried to imagine a future where I stayed, where counseling actually worked, where he learned to be present and I learned to stop carrying everything. The image felt hazy, like a photo smudged with fingerprints. Then I tried to imagine a future where I left, an apartment of my own, silence that wasn't hostile but peaceful, a chance to rediscover who I was. That image was clearer, sharper, but but terrifying. That's when I realized I wasn't just grieving a pregnancy or a marriage. I was grieving the version of myself who believed she could fix everything with enough love and patience. In therapy, I talked about emotional starvation, about how, during my miscarriage, what I'd needed wasn't grand gestures, but small acts of care. A bowl of soup, a clean sink, a touch on the shoulder. The therapist said something that lodged itself in my chest. You've been running a marathon on an empty tank. I thought about all the years I'd been doing that pushing, providing, hoping, and how little had been poured back into me, when I began hinting to my husband that I might not want to continue. He grew defensive again. I'm here, aren't I? He said. I'm working. I'm not cheating. You're acting like I'm some monster. And that, right there, was the crux. In his mind, not doing the worst things made him good enough. In my mind, good enough had to mean more. The kids noticed my withdrawal. The oldest asked me one night if I was okay. I almost cried at the question because it had been so long since anyone in that house had asked me how I was without an agenda. I said, I'm figuring some things out. Days blurred. I went to work, came home, managed the chores, sat in counseling sessions he barely engaged with, and wrote in my journal at night. Each entry grew more certain. I don't feel loved here. I don't feel safe here. I don't feel seen yet. Even in my clarity, guilt wrapped itself around me like ivy. I'd remember his stroke, how frail he'd been, how I'd spoon-fed him soup. I'd remember how he'd held my hand in the ER when we thought I might lose my pregnancy. These fragments of career, but real, would surface and confuse me. Was I being ungrateful? Was I abandoning him? Sometimes I'd scroll through forums late at night, reading posts from other women in similar situations. Words like financial abuse, emotional neglect, dismissive, avoidant, they felt like lifelines, naming things I'd been too scared to name. Each story I read chipped away at my isolation. By autumn, I started to articulate the question out loud. Am I the arsehole for wanting to give up? I whispered it to myself, then to my therapist, then to a close friend, saying it didn't make the guilt vanish, but it made the possibility real. I'm still in the house, still in the marriage, but something inside me has shifted. The scales have tipped. Where once I thought my job was to hold everything together, now I'm beginning to think my job might be to save myself. I don't know exactly when the word crossroads planted itself in my mind, but lately it's the only way I can describe where I'm standing. Every morning when I wake up, I lie still for a few seconds and listen to the house, the shuffle of the kids getting ready, the coffee pot gurgling, the faint sound of his footsteps. It all feels normal, and yet completely foreign. Like I'm living in a life I built, but no longer belong in. Counseling was supposed to be our lifeline. After his grudging apology and reluctant agreement to go, I held a flicker of hope that maybe, just maybe, we could salvage something. But sitting in that beige room with the therapist felt like playing a part in a script I hadn't written. He slumped in the chair, arms crossed, giving one-word answers. When asked what he thought he could do differently, he shrugged. I work hard. I don't cheat. I'm doing my best. I could feel the therapist glance at me, as if to say, is this what you've been living with? The first few sessions were like that, me spilling my heart out, naming the neglect, the lies, the loneliness. Him minimizing, deflecting, or staring at the floor. When the therapist gently asked him if he understood how much the miscarriage had hurt me, he said, yeah, of course. It was hard for me too, and then looked at his phone. I felt my chest tighten. The therapist asked him to put it away. He did, but the moment was already broken. After each session, we'd drive home in silence. Sometimes he'd turn on the radio, sometimes he wouldn't. Once, he said, "You're making me look bad in there," and I remember gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles went white. "I'm telling the truth," I said. He didn't respond. Meanwhile, inside me, a strange calm was growing. Not joy, not relief, but clarity. Like the fog was lifting and I could finally see the landscape of my marriage for what it was: dry, cracked earth no matter how much water I poured on it. I started daydreaming again, but differently this time. Not about baby names or family vacations, but about freedom. I pictured an apartment with sunlight streaming through the windows, quiet mornings with no tension, cooking only for myself, finding the energy to go back to school or start a side project. I imagined laughter returning to my voice, color returning to my wardrobe, the smell of fresh sheets in a space that was mine alone. These weren't just fantasies. They were lifelines. At work, I began to rediscover small pieces of myself. A coworker complimented a report I'd written, and I felt a flicker of pride. I signed up for a weekend coding workshop. I bought a new journal. Each small act felt like reclaiming ground I'd lost. But each time I edged closer to the idea of leaving, guilt roared back. I'd look at him across the dinner table, his lined face, his tired eyes, and think, he's not evil. He's just who he is. I'd watch his kids joke around in the kitchen and think, if I leave, what happens to them? I'd remember his stroke, the nights I'd prayed he'd make it, and feel a twist of loyalty and pity. The therapist told me, guilt is not the same as obligation. An obligation is not the same as love. The words sank into me like stones in water. One night, after another strained counseling session, we sat on opposite ends of the couch. The TV was on but muted. He said, "You don't even try anymore." I stared at him. "I tried for years," I said quietly. "I begged for help. I begged for you. You didn't come." He opened his mouth, then closed it. I got up and went to bed without another word. That night, I dreamed I was running down a long hallway with doors on either side. Some were locked, some open. At the end of the hall was a bright light. I woke up with my heart racing, and for once, instead of fear, I felt determination. The following week, I sat down and wrote out a list: what I'd tried, what I'd given, what I'd lost. Then I wrote another list: what I wanted, what I needed, what I deserved. The contrast was stark. It wasn't just about him. It was about me. About how much of myself I'd abandoned in the name of holding a marriage together. I'm still here, but not in the same way. I no longer scramble to pick up the slack when he drops it. I no longer rush to fill silences with apologies. I no longer say yes out of obligation. I cook for myself first. I take time for my journal. I go for walks alone after work. These small rebellions are acts of self-rescue, he's noticed. "You're different," he said one evening. I didn't answer. Because I am. Sometimes I catch myself looking at the front door, imagining what it would be like to walk out with a bag and not come back. Not in anger, not in revenge, but in quiet self-preservation. To choose life over limbo. To choose love for myself over the slow erosion of my spirit. Other times, I think about what staying would mean. It would mean years more of trying to coax empathy from someone who won't give it. It would mean counseling sessions that go nowhere. It would mean risking another pregnancy loss without support. It would mean teaching his children that this is what partnership looks like. When I frame it that way, the choice feels less like giving up and more like stepping off a sinking ship. But still, the question haunts me. Am I the arsehole for wanting to give up without trying to work on the relationship more? I ask it because I know how people see him: steady, employed, faithful. I ask it because I know how people see me: capable, compassionate, the one who took on everything. But inside our home, behind closed doors, the story is different. It's one of silence, minimization, and neglect. Sometimes I think about my future self, 5 years from now, reading these words in a journal. Will she thank me for staying, for trying again? Or will she wish I'd left sooner? That's the part I don't know yet. What I do know is this: I've spent years pouring everything into a marriage that has left me empty. I've been a caretaker, a provider, a fixer, a stepmother, a nurse, a financial manager, and a cook. I've been everything but a partner in a partnership. And for the first time, I'm starting to believe that my happiness isn't selfish, that my needs aren't secondary, that my life is mine to reclaim. Maybe one day soon I'll pack a bag, or maybe I'll wake up and realize I've already left, even if my body is still here. Either way, the shift has begun. Whether I stay or go, I'm no longer invisible to myself.